My name is Margaret Ellis. I am 59 years old. For 18 years, I hosted the Thanksgiving dinner everyone in my family said I ruined. This year, I set the table like always. Every plate, every fork, every folded napkin pressed into a perfect triangle the way my mother taught me. But when 6 o'clock came, I did not cook a turkey. I did not open the door. And the empty table told my family the truth better than I ever could. Before I tell you what happened that night, let me take you back to the Thanksgiving where everything finally broke. I have been a widow for 11 years. My husband Daniel passed when our children were already grown. And in the years since, Thanksgiving became something I held on to tightly. Not because anyone asked me to, but because it was the one day each year I got to set a table the way I used to set it when our whole family still fit easily under one roof. My daughter Laura is my eldest. Image-conscious in a way that has only sharpened with age. The kind of woman who curates a holiday the way other people curate a feed. She married Mark 15 years ago. Mark has a sense of humor that mostly lands at other people's expense, mine most reliably. My son Ben is younger, kinder, but passive in a way that has cost me more than he probably realizes. He sees things. He has always seen things. He simply has not, until recently, said anything about them. And then there is my sister Helen. Helen has never once needed convincing about what was happening in my house every November. She saw it from the very first year. For 18 years, Thanksgiving was always at my house. Because as the family liked to say, Mom does it best. Nobody ever asked what doing it best actually cost me. Let me show you what 18 years of hosting actually looked like. There was the year the turkey came out 20 minutes later than planned. A small thing. An oven runs hot. A baster gets misplaced. A phone call interrupts the timing. Laura stood in my kitchen in front of everyone and said, Mom always makes things chaotic. Nobody corrected her. There was the year I had paid for everything. The groceries. The turkey, the wine, the pies from the good bakery across town, the decorations I had bought in October because I liked to get them on sale. Mark, mid-bite, with a mouthful of food I had purchased and cooked, looked around the table and said, At least she has one useful hobby. And there was the year almost everyone arrived late, empty-handed, and immediately found something to complain about. The seating was wrong. The food was too cold, or too hot, or not seasoned the way Grandma used to do it, though nobody could quite remember how Grandma used to do it. The temperature in the house was uncomfortable. By 8 o'clock, every guest had left, and I was alone in the kitchen with every dish from a dinner I had built from nothing, by myself for hours. I want to be clear about something. This was not one bad year. This was the pattern. Every single year, in some new and slightly different shape. Here is what my family never fully saw. Or perhaps simply never let themselves see. I bought the groceries alone, every year, pushing a cart through a crowded store the week of the holiday, comparing prices because even though I never told anyone, money was tighter for me than for most of them. I paid for the turkey, the wine, the pies, the decorations strung across the porch and the mantelpiece. Year after year, the full cost landed quietly on my card and nobody asked. I cleaned the house for days beforehand. Not just tidying, but truly cleaning, the kind of cleaning you do when you want a house to feel like it is holding its breath in anticipation of people you love. I borrowed extra chairs from the church hall every single year, because my dining room was never quite big enough for how large the family had grown, and nobody ever offered to bring their own. I started cooking at 5 in the morning, every year, so that by the time the first car pulled into the driveway, the house already smelled like it had been loved into readiness. I sent leftovers home with everyone, wrapped, labeled, packed into containers I had bought specifically for this purpose, because I could not stand the thought of good food going to waste, even food that had cost me far more than money. I quietly covered for Laura's contributions that never arrived. The side dish she said she would bring and forgot. The dessert she promised and never picked up. I simply made an extra one, and let her take the credit at the table. And I bought gifts for my grandchildren every year, wrapped them beautifully, and let Laura's name go on the tag, because she asked me to, because she said it would mean more coming from her, and because I wanted my grandchildren to feel loved more than I wanted credit for loving them. Every year, they arrived hungry, left full, and somehow I was still the problem. It happened last year, during cleanup, after most of the guests had already gone. I had stepped out to the porch to bring in the last of the folding chairs. The door to the kitchen was cracked open, and I could hear Laura and Mark talking inside, their voices carrying the particular ease of people who believe nobody else is listening. Mark said, "Honestly, Thanksgiving would be better if your mother didn't make everything about herself." Laura laughed. Not unkindly, not even maliciously, just easily, the way you laugh at something you have agreed with for a long time without saying it out loud. "I know. But if she doesn't host, we'd actually have to pay for all this." I stood on the porch with a folding chair in my hands, in the cold November air, and I listened to my daughter laugh at the idea that my hosting was not love, but free labor she had simply learned to depend on. I did not walk in and confront them. I did not cry, not right away. I went very, very quiet. And in that quiet, something inside me that had been bending for 18 years finally, calmly, decided it was done bending. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from tonight. And if you have ever carried a tradition alone while everyone around you simply enjoyed it without a single thank you. Stay with this story. Because Margaret was about to do something her family never imagined she was capable of. And it did not involve a single raised voice. I did not announce anything dramatically. I did not call a family meeting. I did not send an angry message in the middle of the night while the hurt was still fresh. I waited 3 days. I let the porch conversation settle into something I could think about clearly rather than something I was only reacting to. And then I opened the family group chat, the one with the turkey emoji someone had added years ago that nobody had ever bothered to change, and I typed a single message. "This year, I won't be hosting Thanksgiving dinner. My house will be closed for the evening. Anyone who wants the family dinner can host it themselves." I pressed send before I could talk myself out of it. Then I set my phone face down on the table and made myself a cup of tea. The replies came quickly. Laura wrote, "Mom, don't be dramatic." Mark wrote, to someone else in the chat, in a message I was clearly meant to see, "She'll cave. She always does." They thought I was bluffing. For 18 years, they had been right to think that. This year, they were wrong. Within an hour, my phone would not stop. Calls, texts, voice messages I did not listen to right away. The accusations arrived in a familiar order, the order they always arrive in when someone finally stops absorbing what they have been asked to absorb. I was ruining tradition. I was punishing the grandchildren, who had nothing to do with any of this. I was being selfish. I was making Thanksgiving about myself. The same accusation Laura had made about a late turkey years earlier, now somehow applied to the 1 year I had not cooked anything at all. I was embarrassing the family. I sat with my tea going cold and felt the old, familiar pull. The one that had moved me into the kitchen at 5 in the morning every November for 18 years. The pull to fix it. To smooth it over. To just host the dinner and avoid the conflict, the way I always had. And then my phone lit up one more time. "Aunt Helen, don't you dare cook that turkey. Let them taste the holiday without your labor." I put the phone down. I did not cook the turkey. 2 days before Thanksgiving, Laura and Mark showed up at my house unannounced. I let them in. I am not in the business of slamming doors, even when I have every right to. Laura did not waste time. "Mom, people are expecting dinner here. You can't just cancel on everyone like this." I looked at my daughter and said calmly, "Then someone should have asked the woman cooking it if she was okay." Mark stepped in, the way he always does when Laura's approach stalls. "You always host. That's the arrangement." I held his gaze for a moment. "No. That was an assumption. This year the assumption ends." Laura tried one more time, her voice rising slightly, listing reasons, listing obligations, listing everyone who would be disappointed. I let her finish. Then I walked them both to the door. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam anything. I simply opened the door, waited for them to step through it, and closed it behind them. Calmly, completely, the way you close a chapter you have finally finished reading. Thanksgiving morning arrived the way it always had. Quiet light through the kitchen windows, the particular stillness of a holiday morning before the day fully begins. But there was no turkey thawing on the counter. No pie crusts cooling on the windowsill. No 5 a.m. alarm I had silenced before it could properly ring. Instead, I did something I had not planned to do until that morning. I set the table. The white plates I had inherited from my own mother. The cloth napkins, pressed and folded into careful triangles. The candles, unlit but standing ready in their holders. The good silverware, arranged exactly the way it always had been. I set out the serving dishes empty. The gravy boat. The casserole dish. The carving platter where the turkey would normally rest. All empty. I set Daniel's chair at the head of the table. The way I always had. Even though he had been gone 11 years. Some traditions are not about who is sitting in the chair. They are about who is being remembered. I wrote out the name cards. One for every person who usually came. Laura. Mark. Ben. The grandchildren. Helen. And then I stood back and looked at it. It was the most beautiful table I had ever set. And it was completely, deliberately, entirely empty. At 6 o'clock, the family began to arrive, expecting what they had always expected. They found a locked front door. They found the kitchen dark, no light spilling from the windows the way it always did. No warm glow of the oven working through the evening. Through the front window, anyone who looked closely could see the dining room beyond. Fully set, candles unlit, plates gleaming, completely, undeniably empty. No smell of turkey reached the porch. No sound of Margaret rushing between the stove and the table. I was not inside. I was across the street, in Aunt Helen's car, watching through the windshield as the driveway slowly filled with cars and confusion. Phones began to ring. Mine stayed silent in my pocket, because I had turned the sound off, but I could see the screen lighting up again and again. Laura called first. Then Mark. Then a cousin. Then, within minutes, one of the grandchildren, who simply wanted to know where Grandma was. Nobody, standing on that porch in the cold, knew what to do. Within 20 minutes, more cars arrived. Neighbors and relatives who always came a little later, carrying their usual contribution of a single side dish, expecting the rest of the table to be exactly as full as it always was. They found the same locked door. The same dark kitchen. The same beautifully empty table visible through the glass. One of the neighbors asked Laura, with genuine confusion, "Where's your mother?" Laura tried to manage it. "She's being difficult." And that is when Aunt Helen stepped out of her car, walked across the street, and stood on the porch steps in front of everyone. No. Margaret hosted this family for 18 years. She cooked, paid, cleaned, and carried this entire holiday while you all complained from her table. Tonight, she gave you exactly what you gave her. Nothing. The porch went silent. The empty table behind the glass was no longer just an absence. It was proof. It was my son Ben who spoke next. He had been standing quietly at the edge of the porch, the way he always stood at the edge of everything, watching, never quite stepping into the center of a conflict. This time he stepped forward. Mom bought everything every year. Half the time Laura took credit for the menu. Mark mocked her while eating food she paid for. And I stayed quiet because I didn't want to fight. He looked at Laura. He looked at Mark. And then, for the first time in longer than I could remember, he said it plainly. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have said something years ago." I was still in the car across the street. I could not hear every word from that distance. But I could see my son standing up straighter than he had in years, and I understood, even from across the road, exactly what was happening. Someone had finally chosen to see clearly. If this story is already touching your heart, like this video now and subscribe for more stories like this. Sometimes the people who stayed quiet for years are not the ones who hurt you the most. They are simply the ones who finally found their courage last. Stay with us. Margaret is about to speak. I got out of Helen's car. I walked across the street, up my own driveway, toward the porch where my family stood, confused, embarrassed, some of them angry, all of them finally, fully looking at me. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I stood at the bottom of my own porch steps, in front of the people I had fed and clothed and carried for 2 decades. And I said, I didn't cancel Thanksgiving. I canceled being used. I let that land before continuing. For 18 years, I fed this family and was treated like a burden in my own home. Tonight, the table is empty because that is what appreciation looks like when nobody brings any. Nobody on that porch said a word. I continued, because there was one more thing they needed to hear. From now on, whoever wants Thanksgiving will help pay, help cook, help clean, or host it themselves. I will come as family, not as unpaid staff. I stood there in the cold, in front of my own dark house, and I felt something I had not felt in 18 Novembers. Peace. The dinner, such as it would have been, collapsed before it ever began. Some relatives left quietly, embarrassed, murmuring apologies they had not quite earned yet. Laura cried on the porch. Not for me, I think, but for the version of her perfect, effortless family image that had just been exposed in front of the neighbors and cousins she had spent years performing for. Mark was angry, the particular anger of a man who has just watched everyone witness exactly what kind of person he had always been when he thought no one important was paying attention. Ben stayed. He walked into the house with me, and together, in the quiet, we cleared the beautifully set table that no food had ever touched. We folded the napkins back into their drawer. We blew out the candles that had never been lit. Aunt Helen took me out for dinner that night. We sat in a small diner that was still open, and for the first time in 11 years, I ate a Thanksgiving meal that I had not cooked, had not paid for, and had not cleaned up after. It was, without question, the best Thanksgiving dinner I had eaten in a very long time. The following year, Thanksgiving looked different. It was smaller, quieter. Ben hosted it, in his own apartment, with a table that did not quite fit everyone comfortably, and nobody complained about it once. Everyone brought something. Actual dishes, prepared in actual kitchens, carried in with actual effort. Laura arrived with a homemade dish, not bought, not delegated, made by her own hands, and she carried it in without a single complaint about the parking or the seating or the temperature of the room. I sat down first that year. Not last. Not after checking the oven one more time or refilling someone's glass, or making sure everyone else was comfortable before I allowed myself to be. Nobody asked me to check anything. Nobody made a single joke at my expense. The table that year was full, not because one person had built it alone in the dark hours of the morning, but because everyone, finally, had brought something to put on it. That year, I learned something simple. A family table is not built by one person's sacrifice. It is built by respect. And if respect is missing, sometimes the empty table tells the truth better than a full one ever could. Studio microphone, if you were me, would you have opened the door that night? Or would you have let them stand outside and finally understand? Tell me in the comments. And if you have ever been the one who carried a family tradition alone, this story is for you. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one.